When the racist slur was thrown into Derrick's crowded cafe, no one expected his gentle, powerful response to silence the entire room and change everyone there forever. When Derrick stepped into the Bean Cellar Cafe, the sun barely rose in the sleepy streets of Cincinnati. It was a favorite in the neighborhood and was known for its aromatic espresso and its eclectic decorations. When people stayed at the pastries and checked their phones, the occasional total of security guards filled the air. For Derrick, it was another early meeting to prepare, but not before he packed his usual black coffee. The line was modest, perhaps 6 to 7 deep. Derrick found his place. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through emails to mentally organize his visit to Japan. Until I noticed a woman in the mid-1940s, soft bell play on the door was hardly registered. She quickly walked in and looked for the room as if it was already upset. Her paragraph joined the line behind him with a loud click on the tile floor. Derrick didn't think much about it at first. People often rushed in the morning, caffeine, and in a short time. But when I heard she could hear, I took a breath and muttered something. The tension began to build up. He ignored it and focused on his phone until the mutter turned into words that were spoken loudly enough to be heard. "Incredible," she muttered. "Some people don't have manners." Derrick looked over his shoulder shortly, not knowing whether she had mentioned him or released herself. Their glare confirmed it was the former. He raised an eyebrow, but then he said nothing and returned to his email. Because he was cooked underneath the surface to stand directly under such a moment, being too subtle before. Nevertheless, he put something in her tone. As the line moved forward, Derrick approached the counter and left the regular room behind. That happened. The female voice is sharp and denounced through the surrounding noise. "Sorry, you cut in front of me," she said. Derrick has frozen and is stumped at this point. This time he turned completely, and his gentle appearance remained unchanged. "I've lined up after I enter," he said evenly. There are no signs of attack in his voice. Her face turned to a dark, dark look. "No, you weren't. I'm standing here," and just proceeded as if you had a place. The cafe's tweets settled down when people noticed the conflict. Derrick could feel his eyes on him. Some are curious and others are uncomfortable. The barista at the counter hesitated and didn't know if they should intervene. Derrick grabbed his floor, his attitude relaxed but firm. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I wasn't in line," Derrick said. The woman crossed her arms, her voice rose. "Of course, you don't think people like you always apply to you." The air became heavier, then the room was silent, and all patrons now focused on the brewing conflict. Derrick felt the weight of her eyes and knew the situation was not over. However, no one in the cafe was waiting for what came next. Derrick took a deep breath, his face calming down, but his heart competed. He heard this tone before he got caught up in the type of claim that was bothering him, blamed and left no room for dialogue. But he didn't expect anything as trivial as the coffee line to escalate so quickly. Not here, not. The woman took a step closer and broke into his personal room. Her fingers fell on his chest. "I know your type," she spits, her voice dripping with light empty. "I'm always trying to take something that isn't yours." Typical cutting lines for rules. The word was usually harsher than others, wearing weights that Derrick and others hadn't lost in the cafe. The couple sat at the window, exchanged nervous looks, her eyes shaking between Derrick and the woman. The barista's hands hovered near the phone and sought help if necessary. Derrick kept the floor and his voice was stable. "I don't know what you mean with my type, but I'm not here to argue with you. I'm lined up like everyone else." Her face was washed red, and for a moment it seemed she could retreat. But then she said in a voice trembling with rage, words that had frozen in the whole room, "Your people think you can do what you want. Well, not here, not today, but nigger." The room fell into a shocked silence, words hanging like a lightning flap in the air. The cup rattled against the saucer as the guest turned his head, and the shock became more pronounced. The barista visibly went back. Her mouth opened and closed, as if she was looking for the right one. Even the woman herself seemed scared of her own audacity at this point, despite her immediate hidden by her rebellious glare. Derrick felt his chest stuck, but he wasn't convulsing. He refused to give her the reaction she probably wanted, an outburst of anger. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and centered it. A man in his early 30s sitting near a nearby table eventually broke his silence. "Hey woman, what's going on with you?" He said. His tone was a mixture of distrust and disgust. Yes, it was from the line. And now I added another voice from the woman standing a few meters away. Marble shafts spread across the cafe, and guests shook their heads and whispered to each other. But women are no longer restrained. If so, her beliefs seemed to encourage her. I said only what everyone else thought and snapped. Her voice rose. Someone had to say that. Derrick finally spoke, his voice calm, but the edge of steel was on his face. "And you thought it should be?" She blinked, discarding his tranquility at this point. "What does that mean?" She shoots back and covers her tone. "That means they all showed the people here," replied Derrick. He interpreted the room, and his voice carried enough volume to reach every corner. "Look at your face. You didn't say what you think. You said what you think. And now you know." The weight of the words from Derrick seemed to hang down into the air, a counterweight to the female poison. But that was just the beginning. What Derrick said next is to turn the flood completely and leave everyone, including them. Derrick's voice, as he continued, gaining calm strength and speaking not only to the women, but to the entire room. "Do you know what this word means to someone like me? What will you wear? It's not just incomplete. It reminds me of the pain, struggle, and history of people who look like me. People who were much worse than they did then, continued to move forward and lift their heads." The cafe was silent. Even the usual shrinking of the espresso machine looked like a break. Each eye was on Derrick when he came in that moment with gentle mercy demanding attention. He turned his focus back to the woman, his tone of voice back to the adamant, but not cruel. "I think you'll take me in my place, but the truth is, you show everyone where you decide to stand, and it is on the wrong side of decency. Humanity." The woman answered with her mouth open, but there were no words. She was replaced by flickering uncertainty despite her stalling. Derrick didn't wait for her to recover. He pointed at those around him, his voice rising slightly. "These people are witnesses. Not just her hatred witness, but something stronger. What I do next. And I have decided not to see more hatred with your hatred. Because that's not me. I saw too much and was too much to direct my reaction to someone like them." A gentle tweet of consensus by the crowd. The man I spoke to earlier nodded at his expression of praise. The barista stepped out behind the counter and her face decided to expose herself. "Sir," said Derrick, "and her coffee is inside the house. And as long as she is worried, she has to look at the woman and you have to go." The woman's face has turned purple. "I'm not going anywhere," she snapped, despite her voice losing her previous edge. Derrick raised his hand to signal the barista. "Let them stay," he said calmly. "Let them know that." He returned to the woman and slightly eased his tone, despite him still wearing the weight of his beliefs. "I don't know what she led at the moment, what pain and fear did to her that this was okay. But I hope it will take some time to think about what happened here today. Because, whether you notice it or not, you have the impression of everyone in this room. And that's not what you think." The woman's mouth opened and then closed again. Her gaze fluctuated across the room, bumping into the verdict, causing her to disapprove. She slowly retreated, and her courage fell down as she turned and went to the door. Someone near the counter started applauding, then another person, and another. Soon, the entire cafe did not apply for departure, but applied for Derrick's dignity and strength. The applause filled the space, a collective perception of Derrick's gentle victory. However, Derrick didn't finish when the door closed behind the woman. He began to talk to the room and left them with the words he had worn all the time after the breakup. As applause faded, Derrick looked at the room and ran into the eyes of the patrons who had seen the exchange. Their expressions were a mixture of praise, gratitude, and quiet reflection. He calmed his silence after a while before turning his eyes to the group. "I'm not here to make the scene," Derrick began. His voice is stable. "But I think we all have to admit something. Hatred does not grow in a vacuum. It lives quietly, indifferent. This moment is not only an opportunity for me to stand up for myself, but also a decision about what we all tolerate in the room." The barista nodded, her arms crossing her aprons. Her face was determined. "You're right," she said, "and I'm sorry it's worth it. You had to deal with it here." Derrick offered her a little smile. "It's not about this cafe. That's what we do next, not just in this moment, but the next time we see something like that." A young woman near the window raised her hand as if she were in a classroom. "She only wants to thank you to deal with your way." "I don't think I was that calm and brave." Derrick's smile spread out. "It's not courage to not be angry or injured. It's about choosing what to do with these feelings. We all have this choice. A man from before. And you did the right thing. That puts strength in the man. True strength." The atmosphere at the cafe changed, and the initial tension was replaced by a sense of solidarity. Consultations resumed, but they wore new tones of new connections and self-observation. People shared their experiences, their stories, opposed to injustice, were too short, or wanted to do more. The room has become almost transformative with energy that is rarely felt. The barista was his second cup as Derrick gathered his coffee and prepared to walk. "For the street," she said with a wink. "And because we are the kind of people we need more in this world." Derrick laughed softly and embraced the gesture. "Thank you. But remember, it's not perfect. It's what happens when it matters." Derrick came out the door, drinking coffee in his hand, making the morning sunlight look a little brighter, and the world looks a little brighter. But the lessons of the day remain not only for him, but for everyone there. And there was the last excellent guide Derrick had to share. In front of the cafe, Derrick paused for a moment, filling the crunchy morning air with his lungs. The conflict was intense, but he had no sense of purpose. He knew that moments like this were not just about standing up for himself. They were for waves to create, think, 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 act, and grow. He looked down at the coffee cup in his hand, and the warmth glowed through the cardboard shell. It reminded him of what his late grandmother always said: "Quality is not a weakness, it's strength." Because it takes strength to choose that. Her words have made him through many moments in life, and today, they have taken control of him again. Derrick turned and thrusts a reflection into the glass windows of the cafe. For a moment he thought of the woman, her anger, ignorance, and pain, even if she refused to recognize it. He wasn't naive enough to believe that his words had changed them, but maybe they had planted seeds. At the cafe, guests were still talking and their conversations were wearing new energy. Derrick couldn't hear her, but he didn't have to. He knew that the story of what happened would go beyond these barriers, inspire some and challenge others. It was a memory of how change didn't require any major gestures. Sometimes it was so simple that I told the truth, considering hatred. Before he left, Derrick looked at the cafe for the last time and smiled. He didn't have to stay to recognize the impact of his actions. He stood up, spoke clearly, and did what he came to remind him that everyone there, and himself, would never take. Such stories remind us of the strength necessary to respond to hatred with grace. They show us the strength to remain in our values, even if it is difficult. If this story is addressed with you, consider how you can make a difference in your own community. And if you believe in resilience and spreading the message of humanity, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We continue these conversations with other conversations.